Welcome. I'm Jen Koppen, the Marketing Manager at Global PMI Partners, and today's webinar is How to Simplify and Mobilize Your Integration Management Office. This is the first topic in our webinar series dedicated to the post-merger integration process. I'll talk briefly about our upcoming webinars and how to register at the end of this presentation. A little housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box. It should be located at the top or the bottom of your screen, and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Also a reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available on our website at gpmip.com. I'd like to introduce our presenters. Chris Charlton is one of our partners in London. Chris is an experienced board advisor and leader in M&A and has been published by the Financial Times on subjects related to business strategy and M&A integration. Scott Whitaker, our partner in Atlanta, is a recognized expert in M&A and has authored the books Cross-Border Mergers and Acquisitions and the Mergers and Acquisitions Integration Handbook. Stefan Hoffmeyer, our partner in San Francisco, leads many of our U.S. Imo Mobilization projects and has contributed to multiple books on the topic of M&A. And Amy McDonald, an associate located in Maine with over 20 years of experience in corporate communications across multiple sectors. These are a few of the books mentioned that are also available on our website. And for those of you just joining, welcome. I now turn it over to Scott Whitaker.
Thank you, Jen. One of the core principles for Global PMI Partners is knowledge transfer. It's something that we build into all the engagements that we do. We have a robust playbook and capability practice, but more so when we do engagements and work with clients, our philosophy is to do it with them, not for them, and leave them with something that they can repeat on their own. And so while that philosophy gets integrated into all our engagements, we rarely do things where we kind of share stop, pause, share what we've learned with others, like in a webinar type environment. And so we've made an effort starting this year to do a little bit more of that, to kind of do a more public knowledge share, similar that we do with our clients when we're doing engagements. So today, what we'd really like to do is kind of share that experience specific to our Imo mobilization framework from 35 plus deployments for all facets of integration, planning, and execution. And I'll say that this is designed specifically for lower to mid-market transactions, understanding that large, transactions that may be in the billions may require a more bespoke approach based on the specific requirements. This is a little bit more prescriptive and for this size. And so as we talk today about that, I just wanted to point that out. We'll address common integration challenges and capability gaps for acquiring companies. And also, we are going to try and endeavor to stop around 40 minutes or 45 at the most to leave time to answer questions. That's the most important part of this are there people that have specific things they'd like to know, hear from others. And so we want to make sure that we save time for that. So just to level set, this is just a representative sample kind of the transactions we've done across a variety of industries. Our mix is corporate and PE. It comes from dozens of sectors and industries and transaction sizes, addressing a variety of integration challenges and priorities. So we understand that every transaction has some unique requirements. Our scope today is to discuss those things that seem to transcend most and kind of focus on those things. But we definitely don't buy into a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's not what today is about. It's about what are those common challenges that seem to manifest in any kind of deal that we want to address. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the integration challenge. I'll turn it over to Stefan.
Thank you, Scott. This is Stefan Hoffmeyer here, and let's talk a little bit about the challenge of building value. And what this graph indicates is that building value is not a straight line. This graph indicates an acquisition, not necessarily a merger, but an acquisition, in which you'll see is to acquire a company, you have to pay a premium for that company. But following that acquisition, there are transaction costs, integration costs, and employee and customer attrition, in addition to decreased performance, as employees are trying to figure out what they're going to do in a new co and where their place is. What this results in is you see that second green box of the post-close value being less than the pre-deal value of the acquired organization. And as you look at your deal strategy, obviously you're looking to build value, and through that, you're looking to achieve cost and revenue synergies. And so that is the typical up and down of an acquisition, and some of the challenges relate. As shown here, what we've developed, and as Scott mentioned already, and we'll be going to in a little bit further detail, is our Imo Mobilization Approach. And that approach is to reduce the risk associated with employee customer attrition, as well as decrease performance, as well as, and most importantly, to increase cost and revenue synergies with a pragmatic approach. But to move on here, we'd also like to talk a little bit about the challenges of a mid-market M&A. And what you'll see here on this diagram in orange are the typical challenges that we see when we come into an acquisition or a merger. On this front, let's go through these left to right to talk about these a bit more. First off is the transaction timing. That really has several facets. The first facet is bringing in integration planning at the right time. And oftentimes when we come in as a consulting team is during letter of intent. So it's really important to get up front of the integration activity and have it really planned well before close. So that's one aspect of transaction timing. The second aspect of transaction timing is especially if you're working and owned by a private equity firm, is the whole period of your company and the realization of synergies, both cost and revenue synergies, and making sure that those are realized within that whole time frame. So that's really important when looking to plan for an integration. As we move to the top and looking at the integration team, what we recommend as much as possible is for companies to utilize their internal resources. Those internal resources know the industry and know your company very well, and frankly have skin in the game for the integration. But that does come with a few risks and challenges. The first is bandwidth. Within your organization, everybody is already 100% or more utilized, and now you're throwing on this additional significant effort with the integration. Following that is experience. Many times executives will have acquisition experience or merger experience, that they were involved in one, but they didn't necessarily have to lead one. And so that management experience, tools, and process understanding is really important to ensure that you have within your organization in order to complete a robust integration activity. And what Scott will do a little later on in this presentation is talk about how Imo Mobilization helps out with that. Further, looking below in the communications and change management, which Amy McDonald will be speaking about here in a bit as well, it's really important to get this right early on, planning for it as well as pre and just during day one of close to make sure that communication and change management goes out without a hitch. This involves employees, making sure, and actually looking at these entities, employees, customers, and suppliers, it's really important to look through their lens and their view of the acquisition. From an employee standpoint, is their job going to change? Do they have a job? What are the opportunities for them in the future? From customers, looking at customers to determine, are products going to change? Is pricing going to change? Are they going to renegotiate with you on their current contracts? And then, of course, suppliers in a similar manner as customers renegotiating contracts. But in addition, if you're dealing with a carve-out situation where you're carving out a piece of a larger company, suppliers are going to look to renegotiate their contracts with you as a smaller company to much their advantage. And so making sure that you have communications and change management appropriate to help ensure appropriate cost revenue synergies is extremely important. So those are some of the challenges that we face typically coming into an acquisition integration. And there are many more, and hopefully we can get to those in our Q&A session that will be after we review this next steps here. And Scott, I think I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about Imo Mobilization.
Thanks, Stefan. So really, this was kind of born out of necessity several years ago. And what we found kind of the most immediate need for the size transactions that we were talking about is helping management teams bridge the capability gap. If left alone, the folks that we deal with are smart enough to figure out how to integrate. It's the things on the right that I'm just about to go through that where you need the most help, and it's where we focus the most and try to help them bridge that capability gap so they can execute well. The first is governance, a well-worn term for any kind of project management. But we really designed this to clarify structure, get role and responsibility alignment, and really specifically, and I'll get to this in a moment, get the right people involved at the right time, doing the right things in the right order. And what the difference in that is, in some traditional approaches, is that you kind of start with everybody and the gun goes off. That's not our approach. We kind of layer that in because everybody has to do a day job. Time is precious. Everybody is time starved that's on an IMO. They're usually the most experienced, capable people. You have to recognize that and manage their time efficiently. The process I'm going to address in the next slide, so I'll hold on that. In terms of tools and technology, our official approach on tools is tool agnostic. We can work within whatever framework or tool that your organization uses, but we do bring in solutions for people that don't have something that they're comfortable with. And our objective in that case is just to design the most efficient method to collaborate, plan, and execute. And we can build that in their environment if they want to do more activity after that. But the idea is this is easy button. We don't want the tool to be an impediment to people being able to do the work. We want a tool to just be an enabler. And that's our approach. In terms of expertise, our philosophy there is to mobilize internal resources first and put them, enable them to solve the problems they need to solve to tackle the most, the integration challenges for that particular transaction. But what we do is bring in learning, samples, artifacts that speed development, and situational expertise based on our knowledge across doing hundreds of these, where there might be some potential landmines and some potential solutions to address those. But we don't want to bring in people if we don't need them. So our philosophy is to start small, layer in others as needed when those requirements are defined. Bandwidth, we are a short-term force multiplier. We act as a transparent extension of the acquiring company management team. Integration work, we don't want to plant, land, and expand and be there until somebody is asking us, what are we doing anymore? Integration work is very intense. Our engagements are very intense, so like a bell curve. And that's the way they should be because you really need to have a bias for urgency to get as much done as possible. So I want to talk about a time construct, and this again, there are situational things that where this is different, but we typically, as Stefan mentioned, want to get involved at LOI. It gives us enough time, usually, to roll out the plan and have enough time to do things well, work with the management team, and as I'll talk about in a moment, get a lot of things done in a pre-planning phase that really inform the work downstream. Sign and close scenarios, as we all know, can differ. So you may have a sign and close that's week, maybe simultaneously. There may be more time between them. That's just a variable to manage. But when you see the month -2, -1, that is our typical life on a project. Again, we're not here and for this size deal. Now the bigger ones I mentioned earlier, that extends. For this size, and you want it to be that way. You want to get in, get things stood up, begin execution immediately, get as much done as possible, and get out of the way or transition what's left to a PMO framework quickly and get back to steady state business continuity, start realizing value and delivering the deal thesis. But our objective is always to help simplify a very complex task. And so to do that, we've broken this work down into kind of 4 major buckets: pre-planning, the IMO kickoff, plan development, and execution. Each phase is designed to inform the next. Other situational variances that I just wanted to mention: HSR situations certainly add a layer of complexity. You may have to delay more detailed plan development because of the sharing of information. So that's one thing that if you're doing that would certainly factor in. If we're engaged late, sometimes we have to prioritize quickly what needs to get done by day one. Obviously, communication's a dominant work stream there, change of control type day one mandatories, but that's usually a fairly simple exercise. But a lot of times people will call us when they've just started to think about integration, and sometimes we get less time than we'd like, but we have a process to make sure we get the right things done by close. So Jen, let's advance to the next slide. So I'm going to go over the phases that I just mentioned, and as I talked about, our core principle is to layer in people as you go here, and when you need them, doing the right things, right time, in the right order. Each stage informs the next. Throughout all, we have a serious bias for urgency. We are always trying to do as much as possible, as soon as possible, but without breaking anything, straining anything, moving forward with answers when there's actually more analysis that probably needs to get done to get to the answer. We'll build that in. But the idea is to control 80% of that's what's going to happen. So there's bandwidth and solution time for the 20% that is going to come up, that's situational. It didn't come up in diligence. It's a new problem, and you need some good thinking around that. What makes the good thinking actually more effective is if you've got the other 80% under control. That's what this process tries to do. So you can see in pre-planning, our objective is to finalize all core integration planning requirements and direction. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves and the senior management team of the company that we're working for, and there may be some target senior management team included, to really finalize all that direction, guiding principles, objectives, synergy targets, et cetera, et cetera. Get all that informed up front so that when the time that you get to kickoff, you've got a very tight and cogent planning direction summarized so people can start thinking about integrating with the end in mind. There's not a lot of loose ends or things that are kind of what if jump balls. Hold on, Jen, just if you can go back, I'm not quite done yet. Thank you. So inputs to that are deal thesis. We'll start with that and really extract what we think is the framework for the integration plan model, target operating model, diligence information, executive input, anything that it was used to kind of as part of the pre-LOI phase we'll take to inform that work. And then the output of all of that, in addition to just kind of standing up the process, is a very comprehensive briefing deck for the kickoff. So now you can move forward, Jen. So the IMO kickoff is, I call it the most important day in the life of the integration. What we like to do is get all of the leads for each function together, the steer co. A lot of times there are other consultants engaged doing work maybe in finance or IT. Everybody in the same room for a couple days to do a little storming and forming, socializing, but also it's a download on the work ahead. So we'll give them that download, provide a lot of time for Q&A, answer questions, kind of suss out gray areas. And it's very much the kind of first day of when they are engaged to do more detailed work on plan development. And so that's a really important meeting. But like in any meeting, I mean, the important part is the prep. If you go into that nailing all the stuff that I mentioned in pre-planning, then it's a very empowering meeting for those leads as they go forth, start working together on their specific integration plans, because we've given them the information they need. All right, Jen, you can move forward. So plan development, we will pivot immediately to, obviously preparing for day one mandatories, begin functional integration plan development, and essentially kicking off everything that needs to get done. Milestones, cross-functional dependency mapping, issues, risk. I mean, think of everything that you need to do in an integration. That gun goes off now for however many work streams that you have involved. Our goal is always to get to an 80% work plan by close, meaning 80% of what you think you need to get done in year one is stubbed out in a plan format. That's an aggressive goal. There's always going to be work to optimize, improve. You learn things, you have to add stuff, you got to change dates, you got to layer in more people. But if you put that aggressive goal to, I really want to see, a lot of detail, get as much stubbed out as possible. That way, when you pivot to execution, you can drive momentum into the acquired entity and be in execution mode and less in figuring out mode. There's always going to be stuff that at close, you get access to more information. It's going to inform more work stream development. We get that. Again, try to get as much done as possible. So when we go to execution, the next one, what we like to do is set up a very predictable rhythm of how we work and kind of knock down the work. So there is the scorekeeping element. We got, heavy statusing focus on how we're doing against all the initiatives that needed to get done day one in the first 30 days, all that. But the expectation is that is moving. Where we try to focus is on sussing out things that are still gray, risk issue escalation, mitigation, addressing post-close communication and culture challenges that Amy will talk about, and really looking to drive momentum into the acquired business and quickly resolve issues that are impeding progress. Last, we will our philosophy is that we like to try to put ourselves out of a job. And so towards the end of the months that were on the previous slide, we like to package things up and work a transition to more of a PMO. There's always going to be integration work left. Our job is not, we don't want to be around the entire time, tracking out 8 or 10 initiatives. That should transition at some point to an internal resource, but that transition has to be carefully managed so that work doesn't get dropped. And so that PMO transition is critical. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to Amy, and it's going to talk a little bit about communication.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be with everybody. As Scott mentioned, as an associate, my role is to work with clients really on your communication challenges. So what you see on the slide here are 6 really common communication challenges. Communication is one of those words that comes up very frequently when we start talking about integration. It tends to be the off-sided scapegoat for integrations gone wrong. It's easy to blame communication because when we handle communication poorly, it tends to be very, very visible. On the flip side, when communication is done well, it's nearly transparent. So sort of put it the way that George Bernard Shaw famously said it, the biggest problem with communication is often the illusion that it has taken place. So as we think about these 6 issues that are, can be kind of common as part of integration, our goal is to use a good, tight, detailed, focused communication strategy to really mitigate some of these distractions, help people stay focused on what's most important, and to sort of marry up that leadership message and the vision and the value of the integration that we want to deliver as a leadership team with those needs at the stakeholder level. What is it our stakeholders need? And so let's kind of step through these one at a time and just talk about how we can really leverage effective communication and mitigate these challenges. The first one is around managing noise. So in every deal, there's always a certain amount of noise that comes up, whether it's pre-deal rumors ahead of an announcement or inconsistencies or misinformation that may happen later on in the game. So, one of the things that that we advise clients on is how to proactively manage noise. A lot of times it's the instinct, given confidentiality and ambiguity, to respond to noise with silence until we have all of the information, but that's actually rarely the best approach. So we work with clients to proactively manage those pre-deal rumors, help identify emerging issues early on so that we can respond to them. There are definitely ways to be able to answer a question without necessarily providing facts that aren't available yet, right, when we don't have decisions made. But we can manage through that process and even prevent issues from flaming up at times by anticipating and addressing them early on. A great example of that is the what about me distractions I'll talk about in a second. But that second block then is orchestrating message delivery. So this is another challenge because, as a small group working on a transaction, we may know very clearly what the answer to all the questions are, right? We can sort of freelance, but the reality is when we start talking about a transaction, when it becomes public, when we start talking to employees or talking with customers, it really becomes a much broader pool of people that are talking about it. And so we want to be able to orchestrate that well. It's really crucial that we acknowledge that the steering team really isn't the only ones who are going to need to communicate about the deal. So our plans identify and equip the primary spokespeople for each stakeholder group with tailored communications that are founded on a common set of key message themes. And then beyond that, we align those efforts into a single overarching communication timeline to ensure that all of the spokespeople understand who's talking to whom when, and that we can make sure that our stakeholder groups across the board are informed in the right order, at the right time, in the right way, by the right person, and that our internal and our external voices are congruent. So the third block there is an important one, really. It's the what about me distractions. And those come in a variety of forms, but your employees particularly face a natural amount of uncertainty in any transaction. And it's not always just the target company employees. A lot of times it can be sort of the legacy or the buyer employees as well. These questions, as you know, will range from do I still have a job to who is my boss, what are my benefits, how is my pay going to be impacted, and they can even extend into seemingly trivial details like when should I update my LinkedIn profile, or what should I do with my email signature, or who do I call about my new expense report billing process. These are front and center issues for employees because they affect either their sense of job security or how they do their job. So addressing them early on in the process helps take those issues off the table to the best of our ability so that employees can focus on the job. One of the best pieces of feedback I've ever heard as part of an integration was at the end of day one of our leaders said, the employees basically said, you answered all my questions. So now I just want to know, how can I help you get this? That's the best outcome possible, right? At the same time, not every answer is always available on day one. So most people will understand that. It sometimes takes a little time to get to answers. But at the same time, if we can't communicate the what, it can be helpful to communicate deeper context around how we're going to make those decisions, so that we can manage people's expectations and manage their uncertainty until answers are available. So we typically will work with each client to outline and articulate a process for reaching these critical answers. Essentially, instead of communicating the what, we focus on communicating the when, how, and why behind some of those me questions that we might not be able to answer on day one. And then as we move through day one and really start looking into some of the post-close integration, we run into this fourth issue, which is how do we begin to coordinate all of the information that's flowing out of all of the work streams? This is the point at the process where there's just a ton of work happening on the execution front, and we can get siloed in our various work streams. Finance has a million things going on, HR has a million things going on, IT, operations, so forth. But many of their action items are actually affecting the same body of stakeholders. So when we don't work carefully to coordinate the change impacts, to coordinate the what's happening when across those work streams, it can seem really chaotic to your workforce. So one of the things that we work to do again is is just carefully coordinate to understand the interdependencies and understand when things are hitting people, and also to really consolidate some of that information flow into one consistent integration communication channel. You know, Scott mentioned before that we are tool agnostic, and I think we're the same really on the communication front. We try to communicate through channels that are familiar to your workforce, things that are accessible to them and easily digestible to them. But we also want to try to do it in a sort of a one-stop shop, so that as an employee, I know that if I want to get the latest about what's happening with integration, I can go to one common place. I know where to find my answers. I know where to get my information, and I'm not being bombarded with 25 emails a day from different groups. We've found that, again, to be a very effective part of the strategy. You know, and then looking again, moving on to the fifth box, as part of integration, we can get very focused on sort of the mechanics of change, right? The processes, the systems, the what to do. And as a result, that's what we're inclined to lean on, really. And as complicated as that can be, it's really the easiest part of managing change. But change, especially cumulative change, as we just talked about, when we have multiple changes across different work streams impacting the same folks at the same time, can really have a drain on a person's psyche, you know, not just their time or their so-called rational brain. You know, think about it. For example, if you've ever switched from Apple to Android devices, there's sort of a mechanical slowdown and adjustment period that happens by making that switch, even though both are intuitive, there are benefits to both. But there's also this sort of psychological impact that can be a little bit harder to overcome, especially if you feel like a change is being forced on you and you can't clearly see the benefit of it. So as we consider that, it's just important to work that into our timing, into our messaging. And as we clearly convey and even celebrate the benefits of change, we can give employees a role in the process, recognition along the way, and help them, you know, and help our leadership teams, again, be mindful of this cumulative change impact. You know, all of these things can help offset some of the negatives and help make our change management strategy more effective, and just help make the process of integration that much smoother. We also will tap into some good feedback channels, you know, whether that's an FAQ email or some other pre-existing feedback system, anecdotal input from the IMO or management teams. Those things will help us listen to the needs of the organization, which again can give us good cues about when we need to sort of slow down, stop, reinforce, and just help sort of manage through, you know, again, not just the mechanical components of change, but also the emotional components of change, which, you know, which are certainly a reality. And then last but not least is this topic of culture. Culture, again, comes up all the time. We see a lot of times unanticipated cultural speed bumps get in the way of our integration effectiveness. So, you know, we try to include cultural messaging starting on day one and really carry that through all of our integration communication. That helps us define what is the desired culture and also reinforce the behaviors that will cultivate that. But that's really just one part of the equation. So articulating that desired culture, if you're deliberate about it, that's, you know, it's fairly straightforward. But actually then moving the organization in that direction is harder, and it takes a little bit longer. So on the surface, you know, two cultures may appear very compatible. It's very typical to hear two CEOs sort of comparing notes ahead of a day one and talk about, you know, our common ground. But then, you know, when it actually comes down to getting work done and how we make decisions or selecting the right systems or approaches for the go forward organization, we can run into unexpected conflicts and obstacles. So no matter how carefully we attempt to orchestrate culture from the top down, it actually emerges from this collective attitudes and norms of the employees. So that's about a lot more than just our published values. It gets down to, you know, how we make decisions, what we value and reward, how we communicate and collaborate, and more. So we've developed actually a minimum effective dose approach to culture assessment to help clients anticipate and mitigate some of that conflict up front and identify some potential pinch points around culture before they occur. That makes us a little bit better equipped to address some of those things in advance Being open about both of our similarities and our differences can help our employees more effectively manage through those things when they arise. And then, again, clearly defining our cultural norms and values just helps clarify expectations. And then we can subsequently recognize and celebrate those desired behaviors and results. So again, these are 6. You could probably, in your own minds, think about 6 more typical communication type pitfalls as part of integration. But at the end of the day, if we have a very focused, detailed communication strategy that enables all of our speakers to be consistent and that considers not just what we want to say, but also what our stakeholders need to hear, really helps us offset a lot of these common challenges. And so that's what we work with our clients to help them accomplish as part of integration. And that said, I'll turn it back to
Thank you, Amy. All right, just a quick summary, and then let's get to questions. But when we are finished and kind of to recap with our clients, the things that we hear, and this is a bit of a summary of kind of what you've heard today, is we've got mission critical direction defined and communicated early, and it's providing that end state vision so people can start integration planning with the end in mind, and that naturally kind of accelerates the process. Key governance and project management challenges solved early, allowing teams to just focus on the work. Transitioning to execution mode immediately post-close is just a natural momentum driver into the acquired business and or for NewCo. The bias for urgency factor, people will commonly say, you guys were extremely aggressive in what you expected to get done, and we didn't really think we could get all that done, but wow, we managed to do it all. And so you kind of have to set a vision of what you can get done for everybody. And then just overall, a well-defined methodology, process, tool, templates, just minimizes impact on business continuity. And again, helps people that are already busy be more efficient. Rarely do we do this where somebody is dedicated to the integration work and doesn't have a day job. I mean, that is extremely rare these days. So let's stop there, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jen, and so we can get some questions going and find out what you're interested in.
Thank you, Scott. We do have some questions. The first one that came in, for the Imo Kickoff, do you recommend having individuals from the acquired business if possible? Chris, I know you have a lot to say on this. Would you like to jump in?
Yes, thanks, Jen, and hello, everyone. Chris Charlton here. Thanks to Ian for that question. The short answer to that is absolutely yes. At Imo Kickoff, because we wholly recommend that the integration team in its entirety is fundamentally made up of people from both the acquiring business and the target, then at Kickoff, you absolutely want those people to be involved right from the very start in designing the program of work and indeed in executing it. The only thing probably that may be a limitation, because we try and recommend that kickoff happens as soon as possible and indeed pre-close, that there may be some antitrust concerns. If there are regulatory hurdles to be overcome, you'll need to make sure that you get legal sign-off on anyone attending for what purpose. Now, given that the whole purpose of that kickoff is looking forward and won't touch any commercial sensitivity issues, then there are usually no reasons why the lawyers would step in and prevent anyone from attending.
Thank you. Another one that came in, how do you navigate culture gap issues between both companies? If there is such a difference in cultures that more colleague attrition than expected begins happening, say one culture is more top down and one culture is more flexible. Stefan, would you like to talk on that?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll also turn it over to Amy because I'm sure she'll have some comments there as well. But one of the things that I see, and you know, in a lot of cases we do come across a culture disconnect. The key thing is to call it out initially and to understand where each company is coming from, acknowledging the difference and determining how best to work together in order to get into one culture over time. And so there are activities you do for culture building, there are communications that need to go out there to accomplish this, but understanding this and bring it to the forefront, bring it in front of everyone so they understand the difference and can work through it is most important. And Amy, do you have any further comments related to the communication side?
Yeah, I think, Stefan, you're absolutely right. It's great to be able to surface those things. You know, one of the things that I've run into on more than one occasion is, you know, when we face cultural differences that are so different, right? So this sort of top-down versus more flexible, as an example, one of the things you don't want to do is to pretend to be something you're not. You know, this really starts at a leadership level or at the IMO level to make some decisions about defining what the culture needs to be. At the end of the day, if you are a top-down culture, it's kind of best to articulate that or to own that, really. You don't necessarily, you know, one of the worst things I think you could do is to pretend to be very collaborative when you're much more directive in your style of making decisions, because that's going to leave people perpetually frustrated, and it's also going to erode trust. And so when you have some of these challenges, I think it's most important, as Stefan said, to really get it on the table, but start at a leadership team and make sure that you've got the buy-in and the understanding.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to that too is prioritize what really matters in terms of cultural alignment and figure out, you know, in terms of vision and mission, what are the things that have to get harmonized, and you live with the other differences. They'll work themselves out eventually, but you can't change the world and decide that you want to, you know, harmonize everything. That's a fool's errand. So decide what's most important and focus on that.
Thank you, speakers. Another question that we have: how many people do you need to staff an IMO? Chris, would you like to talk on this one?
Sure, Jen. That's a great question. I thought in order to answer that question, it's probably worth just identifying what we mean by the IMO. And I'll just give you a quick flavor as to the sort of typical governance model that we recommend in integration scenarios. It starts with the exec layer, which we typically call steerco, or steering committee, and that's the group of execs from both organizations that are fundamentally ultimately accountable for integration and its success and the realization of synergies, and of course the ongoing success of the business. Typically I won't talk about those in terms of the IMO. Then we have the sort of core IMO, the engine room that's coordinating all of the work streams and projects that will ultimately make up the program of work to deliver against the integration objectives. I'll come back to, and that's the group of people that I'll talk about in terms of staffing. The other two layers are then the work streams that make up the totality of the integration program. Broadly speaking, those work streams are, as far and away as possible, aligned to the intended business structure and or functions of the combined company. So you'll have sales and marketing, IT, finance and tax, etc., etc. And then finally, within every work stream, you'll then have a whole series of projects dedicated to delivering specific things, as well as a number of business as usual activities to be coordinated. So if those are the four layers of the integration effort, it's the second layer in that core IMO team that I'm really talking about. And at one level, you can have it very light with just one or two people, providing you've got a very good, strong amount of project management in each of the work streams. In the IMO, I typically think of three types of people. The first, fundamentally, the integration leaders, the two people either sponsoring or that integration director type role, actually day-to-day worrying about integration very much from a commercial point of view and a business point of view. Underneath that, you'll then typically have a program leader, someone who is day-to-day responsible for delivering all of the activity across the entire program. They will typically have someone running the engine, the PMO type activity, to make sure that all the reporting, the risks, the issue escalation and so on is happening. So the IMO can effectively operate as an air traffic control system, managing the complexity across all of the work streams and de-risking the delivery. The IMO itself then, so it's really focused on one level ownership and accountability. That's what your integration sponsors or leaders provide. Then you've got the second piece, which is about delivery. So that's where your program and PMO type skills really come into play. And it depends on how the program itself is set up. With good project managers in each of the work streams, they will typically be part of the IMO. And indeed, because you will have generally more work streams than project managers, you then can freely deploy those project management skills into the work streams as and where they require it, and depending on how much effort they need. And then finally, the one piece of the IMO team, which is really important, is the financial aspect to it. Now, this varies enormously from organizations that are very used to running project finances, in which case they will have business as usual finance teams and processes and systems for managing the finances of the integration, in which case you can just draw those people in on an ad hoc basis and indeed give them responsibility. In other cases, because this is sometimes such a huge project relative to those that others that they've done in the past, there may need to be some dedicated finance resource that ultimately look after the total one-off integration cost on one side of it, but more importantly, to really focus in on the delivery of synergies, be they cost, revenue, or other forms of balance sheet synergy. So the IMO team then is really a mix of those things, and depending on the scale and complexity of the integration challenge ahead will determine how many actual people you need. So I've managed not probably to answer the question, but it could be as thin as one or two people covering all of those things, or it could be a team anywhere up to a size of about 10 in my experience from the most significant scale of integrations, really driving the center and the heart of the whole program in the IMO team.
Thanks, Chris. Another question we have: what tools and techniques do you use to assist with the challenge of multiple work streams tapping into the same resource or resources during integration? Stefan, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let some other folks participate as well. But one of the things that I see in integration a lot is, especially when a larger organization is buying a smaller organization, there tends to be a lot of people trying to get one person's time. And the key thing there is to establish, where possible, single points of contact. So for instance, if you have one business function lead, say in finance or marketing or sales, that all the questions and engagement goes through that one point of contact. So that does help. Secondly, when you have meetings, we try to do as much work as possible to do the integration management within IMO meetings themselves. So if there's any cross-team questions, that we address that as a group quickly, and then work on items, offline, one-on-one as needed. And so that's really important. What you don't want to do is get in a situation where this one person knows a lot of information, say about the target business, and you've got 20 people contacting them asking the same question. And so it's key to establish a methodology around that, whether it be one meeting where everybody's involved, or there's a consolidated set of questions going through a single point of contact within a specific business function. And so that's one of the things that I see. And that's really the techniques around that. And of course, you can use automated tools that are out in the marketplace to help that as well. Does any other participant or any other panelist have any comments on that?
Yeah, this is Scott. One thing, if to get ahead of that, we set up a very robust, we call it data harvesting process. It sounds kind of wonky, but it's simply managing the requests, the inbound, rationalizing duplicative requests, making sure requests are articulated right. So the person that Stefan mentioned that is getting, inbounds from multiple lanes, you can make that job as easy as possible. So you may have to put some process around that if you have a lot of that going on.
Thanks, Scott. Another question we have, does GPMIP leverage a cultural assessment? What does that look like, interview-based or survey-based? Amy, would you like to take this one?
Sure, thanks, Jed. So I think it's important to do both. So our approach is really, looks at a combination of interviews as well as more quantitative data through a SurveyMonkey type of tool. And I think, again, you got to get sort of both sides of that coin, but then you have all of this data and it's a matter of what really you do with it. And Scott touched on this earlier, but, I think you're probably going to get more information than you can put to action or put in action. And so it's a matter of prioritizing that. So working with that steering team or the executive committee to understand, what are the big either pinch points or the big leverage items that we want to influence, and then put a plan in place to really tackle those. It's definitely not a time to try to boil the ocean, as the saying goes. So, thanks.
Thanks, Amy. Another one from Christoph. How essential is organizational project management in planning and steering of the integration? Do you use recommended agile methods and frames? Scott, would you like to take this one?
I guess if you mean the kind of combination of different tools, yeah. I mean, a lot of it depends on what the acquirer is comfortable with, what they're using. For example, we're doing something right now where people rely a lot more on Slack than email, and so how do we integrate that into our solution? Or they're Google Sheet folks versus SharePoint. I mean, we're very flexible, and as I again said, tool agnostic in our approach.
Thanks, Scott. Keeping an eye on time.
Sorry, Jen, I was just going to add to that. I think there was a second part to Christoph's question, which is about agile methods and frameworks. And I think just one comment I would make on this is that typically an integration program is of such scale and complexity for most organizations that it doesn't lend itself to necessarily an agile way of working. However, that's not to say that individual projects within work streams, and in particular in technology work streams, where agile ways of working are perfectly normal and acceptable. And in fact, I had one experience with a major technology company last year where one organization was very project orientated and the other was wholly agile. And bringing those two organizations together represented all kinds of challenges, culturally and in terms of process and method. For the integration itself, though, I would very much recommend going with a project-orientated structure, which gives you that ability to manage the type of complexity that integration represents, and then use Agile, if it's appropriate for both organizations, for specific individual discrete packages of work and projects within each work stream, if that's appropriate.
Thanks, Chris. Keeping an eye on time, we are getting close to an hour. So speakers, are there any other questions you'd like to speak on before we wrap up?
This is Stefan here. One thing I wanted to actually just jump on what Chris had mentioned about the last question, and that is what we try to do as much as possible. I think the overarching purpose for Imo Mobilization is to drive clarity and simplicity. There is a lot of moving parts during the integration, a lot of work that's happening. And at the end of the day, for each of the business function leads, each of the integration team members, and the executive team, everybody wants to have a clear understanding of what they need to do. And sometimes when things get too complex, that can be difficult. And so taking a look at the Imo mobilization process and driving that clarity is one of the most important things that I see in building value and achieving cost and revenue synergies.
Thanks, Stefan.
Jen, can I suggest just taking Carl's question, which is, what is the most important factor to ensure a successful integration project?
Please do.
I have a one-word answer to that question. It's people. We've heard that theme come up time and time again, but our collective experience of somewhere over 300 deals over the past number of years, and all of the research backs this up, is that people are 90% of the reason the integration projects fail. And there are two types of thing related to people. The first is the politics and the culture and the coming together of two groups of people that may never have worked together before. Getting that bit right is wholly and utterly important to get right. And secondly, to make sure that you have the requisite amount of capability and capacity in your integration program to give it the horsepower that it needs to deliver. We often find that a lot of effort and executive attention gets put into the deal phase, but we all know that the deal phase, frankly, is the easy bit. The difficult bit is delivering against it, and having the right team in terms of shape, size, and capability is essential to success. So people is where it really matters, and everything we've seen in our experience of integrations backs that up.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, everyone. I believe this concludes our webinar. I've added to our chat box some links for you. Please visit GPMIP/connect to contact our speakers for further discussing IMO mobilization. And also be sure to mark your calendar for our upcoming webinars and check our website as we continue to post advice and articles that will simplify your post-merger integration process. If you enjoy social media, head over to LinkedIn or Twitter and follow us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.